The morning the letter arrived, Daniel Mercer found it wedged in the crack of his mailbox, like a snake waiting to strike. The envelope bore the embossed logo of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, its gold lettering gleaming against the stark white paper. He ripped it open with the impatience of someone who already knew the contents couldn't be good. The words swam before his eyes. Violation. Fine. $5,000. His throat tightened. He read it again, slower this time, trying to make sense of the absurd accusation. The offense listed in bold print: unauthorized lawn ornament, non-compliant decorative structure. And beneath it, a single description that made him blink in disbelief. Garden gnome. The gnome wasn't just decoration. It had been a gift from his late father, a grinning stone figure with chipped red paint on its cap and a crack across its beard. Daniel had placed it near the roses, a small reminder of summers spent in his childhood yard where his father believed gardens should always have something whimsical. To Daniel, it was memory cast in stone. To the Homeowners Association, it was apparently a financial weapon. He crumpled the notice in his fist, but the paper held stiff, unforgiving. His wife, Marisol, found him standing on the porch, staring at the gnome as though it had betrayed them. "What is it now?" she asked, brushing dark hair from her tired face. He handed her the letter without a word. She read quickly, her brow furrowing deeper with every line. 5,000? For that? She looked from the paper to the squat little figure half hidden among the flowers. It's ridiculous. They can't possibly. She stopped herself, remembering that in Willow Creek, the Homeowners Association's reach stretched further than reason. Later that evening, their son Leo crouched beside the gnome, tracing the crack in its beard with a small finger. "Is he in trouble?" the boy asked. Daniel forced a smile. "No, buddy, he's just not very popular with the neighborhood bosses." Leo frowned. "But he's funny. Grandpa said gnomes protect gardens." His innocence made Daniel's chest ache. He wished it were that simple, that magic could shield them from bylaws and balance sheets. Instead, he knew the HOA's penalties stacked like bricks, building walls around families until they either paid or crumbled. When Daniel called the HOA office, he reached Cynthia Rowe, the president. Her voice was honey laced with vinegar. "Mr. Mercer, your ornament violates Section 14, subsection C of our community standards, which prohibits non-conforming statuary. We have given you 30 days to comply. Failure to do so will result in compounded fines and potential lien placement." He tried to argue that the gnome was hardly offensive, that it sat quietly among flowers, hurting no one. Cynthia cut him off. "This isn't about your taste, Mr. Mercer. It's about property values. Non-compliance threatens community equity, and we cannot allow that." He hung up before his temper boiled over, the word equity echoing like a threat. At work the next day, Daniel found it impossible to focus. Numbers blurred across spreadsheets, mortgage rates and balance sheets bleeding together with thoughts of escalating fines. He was an accountant by trade, a man used to rules and calculations, but the HOA's math was different. $5,000 wasn't a warning, it was leverage. He knew enough about finance to see the trap. The fine wasn't just about punishment. It was a revenue stream. Non-payment would trigger late fees, interest, legal costs, eventually becoming a line. And lines could become foreclosures. All from a gnome. That evening, neighbors whispered as he walked his dog. Some looked sympathetic, others wary, as if his defiance might contaminate them. Paul Bennett, a retired contractor, stopped him at the corner. "Heard about the fine?" Paul said, his voice low. "They nailed me last year for a tool shed being 2 inches taller than code. Cost me $3,000 to settle. They're sharks, Daniel. They circle till you bleed." He shook his head. "Careful, or they'll take more than money." His warning settled heavy in Daniel's gut. Marisol tried to be practical. "We can't fight them, Danny. Maybe just move the gnome to the backyard. Out of sight, out of mind." But he shook his head. "That's exactly what they want, for us to bow. Today it's a gnome. Tomorrow it'll be our fence, or the paint color, or the roses. It's never enough. His stubbornness frightened her, though she didn't say it. She worried his pride would cost them their home. Pride, but also principle. Daniel wasn't the kind of man to surrender easily. One night, unable to sleep, he pulled out the HOA bylaws. He read every clause under the dim kitchen light, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. The rules were a maze of vague language and open-ended authority. Non-conforming statuary could mean anything. Aesthetic uniformity was undefined. The more he read, the clearer it became. The vagueness wasn't sloppy, it was deliberate. Ambiguity was power. It gave Cynthia and her board the freedom to decide, case by case, who complied and who didn't. Daniel felt a chill, as though the gnome wasn't the target at all, but merely an excuse. The next morning, a fresh notice appeared on their door. This one was even colder. Second violation. Immediate compliance required. Daily fines of $250 will accrue until resolved. Daniel stared at the bold lettering, the numbers marching across the page like soldiers. At that rate, the debt would balloon faster than they could manage. He pictured his mortgage statement, the margin already thin. He pictured foreclosure notices, auctions, strangers walking through his home. He tore the paper down, but the glue left a scar on the wood, a reminder he couldn't erase. As days passed, the gnome seemed to draw invisible lines in the neighborhood. Some neighbors crossed the street rather than walk past it. Others lingered, almost defiantly, as if admiring it was an act of rebellion. One evening, a little girl from down the block left a flower by its feet. Daniel saw it from the window and felt something stir. Hope, maybe, or solidarity. The gnome, once just a chipped relic, was becoming a symbol. But symbols are dangerous in Willow Creek. Cynthia called again, her voice sharp now. "Mr. Mercer, this is your final warning. Remove the object or face legal escalation. You are jeopardizing not just your family, but the financial health of this community. Do you want to be responsible for property values dropping across the neighborhood?" Daniel wanted to laugh at the absurdity. How could one stone figure topple an entire street's value? Yet he knew her words carried weight with others. Fear of lost equity was a powerful motivator. It kept people silent, compliant, obedient. Marisol begged him to reconsider. "Please, Danny, don't turn this into a war. We can't afford it." But he looked at Leo, who was watching quietly from the doorway, and shook his head. "It's already a war. They just picked the wrong battlefield." His voice was steady, but inside he felt the ground shifting. He was no longer fighting for a gnome. He was fighting for the right to exist in his own yard without being crushed by rules written for profit, not community. That night, as darkness settled over Willow Creek, Daniel stood by the window watching the street. The gnome sat small and silent among the roses, its cracked smile defiant in the moonlight. A car slowed as it passed, headlights washing over the yard. For a moment, he thought he saw Cynthia in the passenger seat, her silhouette sharp against the glass. The car lingered, then drove on. He felt his pulse quicken. The message was clear. They were watching. Always watching. The following week felt like living under siege. Each day, Daniel came home to find new envelopes taped to his door, stamped with the Willow Creek Homeowners Association seal. Each one carried the same sterile threat: accruing fines. Immediate action required. The numbers climbed with a merciless rhythm. $5,000 became $6,250, then $7,000. It was like watching a debt meter tick upward at a casino, except the house always won. Marisol began hiding the notices in a drawer, as if removing them from sight could somehow erase their weight. But Daniel kept pulling them back out, spreading them across the dining table like evidence in a case only he seemed determined to fight. Leo asked questions. Daniel struggled to answer. "Why are they mad at us? Did we do something bad?" Daniel wanted to shield him, to say it was all a mistake, but he refused to lie. "We didn't do anything wrong, buddy. Sometimes people make rules to keep control, even if the rules don't make sense." Leo tilted his head. "So he just let them?" The boy's innocence stung. Daniel pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Not this time. It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but the words felt like armor, and he needed the weight of them. At the office, Daniel's concentration splintered. He spent lunch breaks poring over property law forums and HOA case studies. He learned that Willow Creek, like many associations, wielded the power to place lines without court approval. A fine, if left unpaid, could transform into a lien on the property. Enough liens stacked together, and foreclosure wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. It wasn't about lawn ornaments or paint colors. It was about money, control, and keeping the revenue cycle flowing. The Gnome was simply the wedge that allowed the association to pry into their financial lives. On Friday evening, Marisol found him hunched over the kitchen table with legal printouts scattered like fallen leaves. "Danny, this is eating you alive," she said softly. "You're not sleeping. You're barely eating. I'm worried." He looked up, eyes ringed with fatigue, but also lit with something fierce. "If they can do this to us, they can do it to anyone. Paul told me they went after him for a shed." "What about the Garcias? Their shutters are painted a shade darker than approved. Who's next? Where does it end?" His voice cracked on the last word. Marisol reached for his hand, but he pulled back, clutching a highlighted clause from the bylaws as if it might shield him from collapse. That weekend, he decided to attend the monthly HO board meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile building with beige walls and rows of folding chairs. Daniel walked in feeling like an intruder. Dozens of neighbors filled the room, some whispering, some avoiding his gaze. Cynthia Rose sat at the front, flanked by two board members, Harold, a retired banker with sharp glasses, and Denise, a realtor who smiled too sweetly when she spoke. Their table was covered in binders and water bottles, the tools of bureaucratic war. When the floor opened for comments, Daniel stood. His voice shook at first, but steadied as he spoke. "I want to address the fine levied against me for a garden gnome. $5,000 for a decorative statue is not reasonable. It's extortion. And these daily fines you're adding, $250 every day, are designed to trap families into debt. This isn't about property values. It's about control." A murmur spread through the crowd, but Cynthia raised a hand. "Mr. Mercer," she said smoothly, "the rules are clear. Non-conforming statuary disrupts the aesthetic continuity of Willow Creek. Home buyers want uniformity. That's what preserves equity." Daniel's temper flared. "Uniformity? My father gave me that gnome before he died. It's not some neon sign or a rusted car on cinder blocks. It's a memory, and you're threatening to take our home over it." Cynthia's expression didn't waver. "Sentiment doesn't supersede community standards. If we allow one violation, we risk a cascade. Standards protect everyone's investment." She let the words investment linger, knowing they carried weight. Fear of financial loss was more persuasive than sympathy. To his surprise, a voice rose from the crowd. "He's right," said Paul Bennett, the retired contractor who had warned him weeks earlier. "I lost thousands because of your shed rule. We're supposed to be neighbors, not prey." Others shifted uncomfortably, but a few nodded. Cynthia leaned forward, her smile sharp. "Mr. Bennett, you agreed to the terms when you purchased your property. The same applies to Mr. Mercer. If you dislike the rules, perhaps Willow Creek isn't the right community for you." The dismissal was icy, final, and the murmurs in the room died. Daniel left the meeting burning with rage. Marisol tried to console him on the drive home, but he barely heard her. He replayed Cynthia's words, her calm dismissal of his family's struggle, over and over. Perhaps Willow Creek isn't the right community for you. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. He realized then that the HOA didn't merely want compliance. They wanted obedience. And anyone unwilling to submit would be pushed out one way or another. Days blurred into nights as the fines mounted. Daniel began recording everything: phone calls, notices, meetings. He built a file thick with evidence, convinced he would one day need it. But evidence alone wasn't enough. He needed leverage. That's when he began digging deeper, not into his own case, but into the HOA itself. He requested financial statements, citing his rights as a member. It took weeks of stonewalling before they finally relented, handing over a packet so sanitized it smelled of bleach. Still, buried in the numbers, Daniel found cracks, unexplained maintenance fees, vague consulting expenses, and payments to companies with suspiciously generic names. The totals didn't add up. Someone was siphoning money. He showed the packet to Marisol, pointing out the irregularities. "Look here," he said, tapping the page. $20,000 to Community Advisory Partners. No address, no phone number. And here, $10,000 for aesthetic and consulting. What does that even mean? Marisol frowned. Are you saying they're stealing from us? Daniel nodded slowly. Not just us, everyone. Every fine, every fee. They're funneling it somewhere. The gnome isn't the problem, it's the excuse. The realization lit a fire in him. He began talking quietly with neighbors he trusted, sharing what he found. Some were too scared to get involved, but others listened, their faces hardening as the puzzle pieces clicked. Paul muttered, I knew they were crooked. A young mother whispered, They fined me $500 for my kid's playhouse. I thought it was just me. Whispers turned to conversations into murmurs of resistance. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One evening as Daniel walked home from Paul's house, he noticed a car idling near his driveway. Its headlights flicked off as he approached, leaving only the faint glow of a cigarette inside. The engine purred, low and threatening. He froze, pulse pounding, but the car eventually rolled away, disappearing into the night. When he reached his porch, a fresh notice was taped to the door. This one read simply, Non-compliance will not be tolerated. There was no fine amount listed, no legal jargon, just those 5 words printed in bold. It wasn't a notice. It was a warning. That night, Daniel barely slept. He sat by the window, watching the gnome under the silver glow of the moon. It seemed smaller than before, fragile against the tide building around them, yet he couldn't bring himself to move it. To do so would be surrender. And surrender meant more than losing a statue. It meant losing himself. Somewhere deep in his chest, anger hardened into resolve. If the HOA wanted a war, he was done fighting on their terms. He would strike back, and this time, he wouldn't be alone. The next morning began with silence, the kind that felt heavy and deliberate. Daniel stepped outside and found the neighborhood unusually still. No kids on bikes, no neighbors walking dogs, no lawnmowers humming in the distance. Only the gnome sat in its usual place, its cracked smile tilted upward as though mocking the emptiness around it. He could feel the isolation pressing in, a quiet boycott orchestrated by fear. Word had spread, and now families kept their distance, unwilling to risk being tainted by his defiance. Marisol noticed it too. At the grocery store, 2 women from the neighborhood turned down the next aisle when they spotted her. At school pickup, another parent offered only a clipped nod before hurrying away. It was as if the Mercers had been marked with invisible ink, branded as troublemakers. At dinner that night, Marisol pushed her food around her plate. They're cutting us off, she whispered. That's what they do. They make you the example. People are afraid to stand near us. Daniel clenched his jaw, staring at his untouched meal. Good, he said. Fear means they're starting to see the truth. But even as he spoke, he felt the weight of loneliness pressing deeper. Determined not to break, Daniel doubled down on his investigation. He began spending late nights at the county clerk's office, poring over property filings, board meeting minutes, and contractor records. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. His eyes stung from the endless pages, but eventually he began spotting patterns. Payments funneled to shell companies weren't just suspicious. They were linked to board members' relatives. A landscaping company owned by Denise's cousin. A consulting firm that listed Harold's son as CEO. And buried among the files, Daniel discovered that the HOA had quietly taken out a construction loan years earlier, supposedly for community improvements. The funds had been drained, with little to show for it beyond a few cosmetic upgrades and inflated invoices. The gnome fine wasn't random. It was part of a machine built to generate cash flow. He carried copies of the documents home in a battered briefcase, spreading them across the table like a detective piecing together a crime. Marisol watched him shuffle papers with a mix of awe and fear. "Danny, if you push this too far, they'll come after us harder." He didn't look up. "They already are. But now I know how they're doing it." His finger tapped the page showing the construction loan balance. "If we expose this, they can't touch us without drawing more attention. They're vulnerable too." She wanted to believe him, but her gaze kept drifting to the window, where the gnome sat lit by the porch light, as if daring the board to make their next move. One night, Paul dropped by with a folder of his own. "Found this in my garage," he said, sliding it across the table. Inside were copies of his violation letters, photos of his shed, receipts of payments he had been forced to make. "They bled me dry," he muttered. "But I never threw the papers out. Didn't know why until now." Daniel scanned the documents and saw the same pattern: overblown fines, vague clauses, and escalating penalties that turned neighbors into revenue streams. Paul leaned back in his chair. "You're not crazy. They've been running this racket for years. People just pay because they're scared. But if you're serious about fighting back, I'm with you." With Paul on his side, Daniel began reaching out to others more openly. Late at night, small groups gathered in his garage, speaking in hushed tones as though the walls themselves might be listening. There was Mrs. Green, fined $2,000 for a trampoline. The Garcias, penalized for shutters deemed non-compliant beige. The whispers turned into anger, the anger into plans. They weren't just neighbors anymore, they were potential allies. And together, they began to see the gnome not as a violation, but as a banner. A symbol of quiet rebellion against a system designed to bleed them dry. The first sign that the board sensed this shift came in the form of a letter, not just to Daniel, but to the entire neighborhood. It warned against collective action and reminded residents that defaming the association may result in legal recourse. Cynthia signed it in her meticulous script, a flourish of power at the bottom of the page. Daniel pinned the letter to the corkboard in his garage, underlining the word defaming in red. "They're scared," he told the group. "If we weren't making noise, they wouldn't bother threatening us." But the board wasn't bluffing. 2 days later, a process server knocked on Daniel's door, handing him a thick envelope. Inside was a formal notice. The HOA was initiating legal proceedings for non-compliance. The fines had ballooned past $10,000, and now the association claimed damages to community property value. The language was clinical but carried the weight of a guillotine. Marisol sank into a chair as Daniel read it aloud, her face pale. "Danny, this could ruin us." He folded the letter carefully, slipping it into his briefcase. "Not if we ruin them first." The lawsuit lit a fire under the neighbors. Attendance at the garage meetings doubled. People brought their own stacks of violation letters, receipts, and stories of intimidation. The evidence grew into a mountain of paper and testimony. One man confessed that Cynthia had pressured him into selling his home at a loss, only for her realtor friend Denise to flip it for profit. A woman revealed that Harold had threatened her with foreclosure if she didn't agree to a sudden emergency fee. Piece by piece, the puzzle took shape, the corruption no longer a theory, but a map of exploitation. Still, resistance came at a price. Cars lingered outside Daniel's house at odd hours. Marisol swore she saw someone rifling through their mailbox late one night. Leo began having nightmares, waking in tears and asking if the gnome police were going to take their home. Daniel held him close, whispering reassurances he no longer fully believed. The paranoia was real, and it gnawed at them. But so was the resolve. The more the board pushed, the more determined Daniel became to drag their empire into the light. He decided the next step was to bring their findings to the county council. Armed with his files, Paul's testimony, and the support of a dozen neighbors, Daniel planned to present their case. They needed outside eyes, an authority higher than the HOA's manufactured rules. The night before the hearing, he sat at the kitchen table, rehearsing his arguments, his papers neatly stacked. Marisol hovered nearby, her hands trembling as she poured coffee. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered. "They won't just roll over." He met her gaze, his voice steady. "I don't need them to roll over. I just need them to slip." The morning of the hearing, Daniel dressed in his best suit, the one he hadn't worn since his father's funeral. He adjusted his tie in the mirror, studying the man staring back at him, tired, angry, but resolute. As he stepped outside, he paused to look at the gnome one last time. Its chipped paint and cracked beard seemed to carry a weight beyond stone, as if it knew it was at the center of something much larger than itself. He touched the top of its cap for luck, then climbed into the car, unaware of just how far the battle was about to escalate. The county council chamber was colder than Daniel expected, the kind of institutional chill that seeped into his bones. Rows of fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting a sterile glow on the polished wood panels. He and Paul sat shoulder to shoulder, flanked by a handful of neighbors who had dared to come forward. Each clutched folders, photos, and receipts, their collective fear hidden beneath coats and determined eyes. Across the aisle, the HOA had gathered like a defensive phalanx, Cynthia in her sharp blazer, Harold with his watch gleaming, Denise whispering into her phone. Their confidence radiated, but it carried an edge, as though they weren't as untouchable as they wanted to appear. When Daniel's name was called, he rose with his briefcase in hand, his pulse thundering in his ears. He walked to the podium and unfolded his papers, fingers trembling only slightly. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I am here today because my family has been fined $5,000 for a garden gnome, but this is not about a statue. This is about a system of exploitation hiding in plain sight." He laid out the documents one by one, violation letters, bank transfers, inflated invoices. He spoke of the construction loan drained dry, of relatives paid through shell companies, of neighbors bullied into submission. Each fact landed like a hammer, and with every word, the room shifted from skepticism to uneasy silence. Paul followed, recounting his ordeal with the shed. His voice cracked with anger as he described losing his savings, watching his children pack their toys into boxes when foreclosure loomed. Mrs. Green added her story about the trampoline, the Garcias about their shutters, and soon a wave of testimony filled the chamber. One by one, voices rose against the board, painting a picture too detailed to ignore. At the table, Cynthia's smile tightened. Harold leaned back, crossing his arms, but his eyes flickered nervously. Denise typed furiously on her phone, thumbs a blur as though texting reinforcements. When the board's turn came, Cynthia stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor like gunshots. Her voice was calm, practiced, dripping with authority. "This association exists to protect property values and maintain community standards," she declared. "We are volunteers, not villains. The individuals you've heard today are disgruntled homeowners who simply refuse to follow the rules they agreed to when they purchased their homes." She waved a stack of documents. "We have bylaws, covenants, and contracts to prove our authority. Without our enforcement, this neighborhood would fall into chaos." Her words carried weight, but Daniel noticed something. She didn't address the loan. She didn't deny the shell companies. She sidestepped the most damning evidence and leaned only on legal authority. The council members exchanged glances, scribbling notes. One asked about the missing funds, and Cynthia's answer was vague, circling back to improvements and community enrichment. The tension grew thick enough to choke. Finally, the chairperson leaned forward. "We'll review all submitted documents and testimonies," she said. "Until then, both parties are advised to refrain from further escalation." The gavel struck, but the echo felt hollow. This wasn't over. It had only widened the battlefield. Back home, Daniel's phone buzzed relentlessly. Neighbors thanking him, strangers asking for details, even a local reporter requesting an interview. His garage became a war room, stacks of evidence climbing higher, a map of corruption drawn across corkboards and strings. But victory was still uncertain. The board retaliated with letters warning of additional assessments, threatening lines, and citing bylaws Daniel had never heard of. "They're inventing new rules," Marisol muttered, holding one such letter like it might burn her fingers. "They don't care about exposure. They're daring you to keep fighting." The pressure mounted. One evening, Daniel returned from work to find his mailbox smashed, the gnome toppled into the dirt. Its chipped cap was split clean in two, its smile fractured beyond repair. Leo burst into tears, clutching the broken pieces. Daniel knelt beside him, fury rising in his chest. "We'll fix it," he promised softly. "We'll make him stronger than before." But inside he knew it wasn't just vandalism. It was a warning. The board, or someone loyal to them, was sending a message. "Stop, or we'll destroy more than your gnome." Marisol pleaded with him that night. "Danny, maybe we should just pay. Maybe it's not worth losing everything." Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I'm scared for Leo. I'm scared for us." Daniel pulled her close, whispering into her hair. "If we give in now, they'll never stop. They'll bleed us until there's nothing left. I can't let that happen. Not for us, not for anyone here." She said nothing, only held on to him as though afraid he might vanish into the fight he had chosen. Days later, Daniel received an envelope from an anonymous source. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a photocopied check attached. The check was made out to Harold, signed by one of the HOA's supposed contractors, for an amount far beyond any reasonable service. Scrawled in shaky handwriting at the bottom of the page were the words, "Look deeper. You're close." Daniel stared at it, his heart pounding. Whoever sent it was either an ally inside the board or someone desperate to see them fall. Either way, it confirmed his suspicion. The money trail was dirtier than he imagined. With Paul's help, he traced the contractor's account, uncovering a chain of payments routed through fake companies and back into board members' pockets. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was embezzlement. Fraud on a scale that could destroy careers and reputations, if revealed. Daniel realized the council hearing had only scratched the surface. This was criminal, and it demanded more than petitions and testimonies. It needed law enforcement, journalists, auditors, people with power. But going that route meant risking exposure himself, painting a target even larger on his family's back. Late one night, as he sorted through the growing mountain of evidence, Daniel looked out the window and saw headlights lingering across the street. A car idled with its lights off, unmoving for nearly an hour. His skin prickled with dread. He drew the curtain, his mind racing with possibilities. Were they watching him? Were they planning something worse? He turned back to the papers, his resolve sharpening. If they want a war, he whispered to himself, then they'll get one. But in the quiet of that moment, Daniel couldn't shake the question clawing at his mind. If the board had already stooped to threats, vandalism, and surveillance, what would they do when he exposed them publicly? How far were they willing to go to protect their empire of control and cash? The morning of the neighborhood assembly dawned gray and heavy, clouds sagging low, as if the sky itself anticipated confrontation. Daniel set up folding chairs in his backyard, a makeshift arena for what he knew could be the most dangerous day of his life. The air smelled of damp earth and tension. One by one, neighbors filed in, Paul clutching a thick folder, Mrs. Green holding a thermos of coffee, the Garcias whispering nervously. Even people Daniel barely knew arrived, curiosity and desperation etched into their faces. By the time the clock struck noon, nearly half the community stood in his yard, buzzing with nervous energy. Everyone was tired of being strangled by the Homeowners Association, but fear lingered in their eyes. This wasn't just a meeting. It was an uprising. Daniel stood at the front, a table stacked with documents behind him, the shattered gnome's pieces placed like relics. He raised his voice over the murmur. "They fined me $5,000 for a gnome, but that gnome is not the real story. It's just a symbol of something bigger. What they're doing to all of us." He pointed at the folders. "They are stealing from us, not enforcing rules. Stealing. Money meant for sidewalks, parks, and security has gone into their pockets. I have proof." He held up the anonymous check, the contractor invoices, the bank transfers. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. The neighbors leaned closer, their anger stoked by evidence that confirmed what they had long suspected. Before he could continue, the screech of tires cut through the air. A sleek black SUV rolled up to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the restless crowd. The doors swung open, and out stepped Cynthia, Harold, and Denise, dressed in their power uniforms. Cynthia in a crisp suit, Harold with his gold watch glinting, Denise with her clipboard clutched tight. They didn't look rattled. They looked like generals arriving to crush a rebellion. Cynthia's voice carried with chilling authority as she approached. "This gathering is unauthorized," she declared. "You are in violation of community bylaws. Disperse immediately or face legal consequences." Her words were met with boos and shouts, a wave of defiance Daniel had never heard from his neighbors before. Daniel's chest swelled as he saw it, the board's power cracking in real time. He turned back to the crowd. "They're afraid of you. Afraid of us. That's why they're here. Because the second we stand together, their empire collapses." His words struck a chord, and the crowd roared in response. For the first time, Daniel saw hope flash in weary eyes. But hope was fragile, and Cynthia knew how to weaponize fear. She stepped closer, her voice low but sharp. "You're playing with fire, Daniel. You think you can expose us? You think you'll survive the storm you're stirring?" Her smile was thin, venomous. "We built this system. We can bury you with it." The confrontation escalated. Neighbors shouted accusations. "Where's the park fund? Why is my mortgage doubled? Why did you threaten foreclosure on my house?" The board members deflected, denied, or snapped back. But Daniel's evidence spoke louder than their words. He projected copies of the documents onto a makeshift screen, each one like a blade cutting through their facade. Harold shifted uncomfortably. Denise's hands shook as she scribbled notes, and even Cynthia's icy composure wavered. The crowd's anger surged into chants. "Resign, resign, resign." For a moment, it seemed victory was within reach. Then, a voice cut through the chaos, an older man stepping forward from the back. He wore a county badge on his belt and carried himself with the calm of someone used to authority. "Name's Officer Trent," he said. "Code enforcement. I've been sent here because of multiple complaints, and after reviewing some of these documents, I'll be forwarding them to the district attorney's office." The yard fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. The board froze. For the first time, genuine fear flickered in Cynthia's eyes. The crowd erupted into cheers, a thunderclap of hope breaking the storm. But victory is never clean. That night, as Daniel packed up the remnants of the meeting, he felt the unease settle back into his bones. The board might be cornered, but cornered predators were the most dangerous. He checked the locks on his doors twice, peered out windows at every passing car. His phone buzzed with messages, neighbors thanking him, reporters asking for interviews, anonymous numbers sending veiled threats. One text chilled him more than any other. "You think this ends with us? You have no idea who you're really fighting." The following week was a blur of interviews, subpoenas, and meetings with lawyers. Daniel became the reluctant face of resistance, his story spreading beyond the neighborhood into local news. Strangers stopped him in grocery stores to shake his hand. But at home, Marisol kept curtains drawn tight. Leo asked why men in suits had come to the door with questions. Daniel tried to smile and say, "Daddy's just helping fix the neighborhood." But the truth weighed heavier each day. Because the deeper he dug, the clearer it became. The HOA board wasn't just greedy. They were connected. Their shell companies linked to larger developers, campaign donors, even county officials. This wasn't just about a gnome. It was about power tangled in roots far deeper than he imagined. Late one evening, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table, the broken gnome repaired and repainted beside him. Its smile was crooked now, imperfect but resilient. He stared at it, exhaustion clouding his mind, when headlights flashed across his window. A black SUV idled at the curb. His phone buzzed again with the same anonymous number. The message was short, brutal. "Stop digging, or your son's treehouse will burn." His stomach dropped. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was war, and his family was in the crosshairs. Daniel clenched the gnome in his hands, its rough ceramic edges digging into his palms. He had wanted to protect his family, to fight for justice, but now he saw the cost. The question clawed at him. Could he keep pushing without sacrificing everything he loved? Or had the battle grown too big for one man to win? Outside, the SUV's engine growled, then rolled slowly away into the darkness, leaving behind silence and dread. Daniel whispered to himself, "It started with a gnome. But how far will this fight take me?"